Welcome to the 2018 Spring Webinar Series, and today's presentation we have implementing the NEWA weather and pest model information into a Vineyard IPM strategy. My name is Raquel Callos. I am the Extension Support Specialist for the New York Statewide Viticulture Extension Program. We've got one more webinar later this spring, SO2 management in your winery. That's on May 8th, and the registration for that is already actually open. You can find it on our website or in the last email that I sent out. So to ask questions, please use the Q&A button that you see on the menu on the bottom of your screen. Open the chat bar, use it to introduce yourself, make comments, and alert me if you're having technical difficulties. Make sure you change the chat settings to send to all panelists and attendees. So today's webinar is discussion on using the NEWA website to guide your Vineyard IPM strategy. Our speakers are Tim Weigel and Dan Olmsted from the New York State IPM program. Tim is, Tim is a senior extension associate where he plans and conducts extension and applied research programs focused on integrated pest management for grape production. And Dan is the NEWA coordinator where he focuses on developing digital forecasting tools for real-time management decisions. So with that, I will hand it over to Dan.
Great, thanks Raquel. Let me load my screen. Okay, everybody should be able to see my desktop now. I'm just gonna launch my presentation and get started. So thank you for having me today. I'm the NEWA coordinator and I'm based in Geneva, New York at the New York State Agricultural Experiment Station. We actually just recently changed our name to Cornell Agritech at NYS AES, just for a bit more recognition and association with the university and with our extension folks. But I'm going to talk today, what I'm going to do is give you a brief overview of what NEWA is, what it's about, ways you can get and connect with it, and what Tim Weigel, my colleague, is going to do is discuss some of the specific grape tools. So to give you a little bit of background, NEWA has actually been around for a very long time, and before the seminar started, Raquel made a very good point. The name, as it has been for the past couple of years, is the Network for Environment and Weather Applications, but it used to be called the Northeast Weather Association. The name was changed because it's become a very useful and popular tool, not only within New York State, because we have our primary mission of helping New York growers, but what we do is also applicable in other areas. And so the updated name really reflects that we're not just a regional program anymore. We're as far west as Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we're as far south as North Carolina. NEWA really is what we call a decision aid system. So it takes information from a series of weather stations, and for each of those locations, we are able to populate dynamic models that change, some of them on an hourly basis, depending on what's happening on the ground in your specific location. At this point, we have over 40 online models and resources. A lot of these are commodity specific, such as apples and grapes, like what we're going to talk about today, and others are based more on basic weather output and degree days, which I'll just talk about very briefly in my portion of the talk. As of yesterday, we have 639 weather stations. This is an interesting phenomenon in the past couple of years. If you look at the number of stations we're adding year over year, we're in a very almost vertical growth curve, which is great news, which means we're able to help all of you as growers. I want to mention our partners and collaborators because really without everyone's help throughout the system, NEWA would not be able to do what it's doing. And so from a technical standpoint and from a climatology standpoint, we work with the Northeast Regional Climate Center based at Cornell University. Although at this point we are reaching beyond the Northeast, as I just mentioned. They help us program our models and they work with the researchers and the folks with expertise, such as my colleagues, Julie Carroll and Tim. And then because we're talking amongst a crowd of people from a variety of states, we work with extension and land-grant universities in all of the places listed here in this slide. We have 13 member states right now. Within the next 2 weeks, West Virginia is also going to join. And what that means is that once participation is figured out at the state level, there is a state fee that's paid every year. Any grower in that state, if they want to purchase their own station, they can link and onboard with NEWA at no additional cost beyond that station to themselves. And so that gives you full access to any of those tools I was just describing. So what exactly does NEWA do? It's important to make a distinction because there's a lot of different apps and websites and tools out there. But so in essence, what NEWA really does is it provides short-term risk assessments. When I say short-term, I mean what is happening today with grape berry moth, what might be happening in the next 3 to 5 days with grape diseases of interest. This is in contrast to a step back where, hey, I want to figure out what I can expect in the next 3 months. You know, are we going to get X number of intense rainfall events and so on and so forth. So what NEWA does is short term, and there are other resources outside of NEWA, such as another program called Climate Smart Farming at Cornell that might provide longer term stuff. So I just wanted to make sure we have that distinction. How does NEWA work? I already mentioned Tim Weigel, who's on with us today, and he'll talk in just a few minutes. In apples, it's Dr. Juliet Carroll at the New York State IPM program. And then we have Abby Seaman, who helps coordinate the vegetable resources that we have. My role as NEWA coordinator is to be more of a generalist. So I'm not necessarily developing specific commodity-based tools. I'm looking more at what are the technologies out there to make things happen. What should we start looking at moving forward to provide cutting-edge research and approaches to providing IPM-based decision-making tools to you, the grape growers. So in essence, everything we do is based on weather stations that you place in your vineyard or on your farm. This is one type of weather data. Another type of weather data you might hear about is gridded data, or something where if you're on Weather Underground, you can pick a latitude and longitude, and you can get a generalized forecast anywhere. We advocate the use of physical weather stations on the ground because, especially where we are in the Finger Lakes, for example, you can get significant microclimate changes within 100 yards. And so if you have a high value crop, you want very location specific weather data informing your grape models in that location. Sometimes we have folks who can get away with looking down the road. You know, this is open access, and so any of the stations we have in NEWA are available to anyone. But if you're really looking for the best decision-making process, we recommend getting a weather station and linking to the NEWA platform. And if you have more information or additional questions, we just recently started a help desk platform. So this is really for anything. If you email support@newa.zendesk.com, we're happy to help you. If you're interested in a station, if you need more information, that's the place to go. So make a note of that. So again, just giving you a very broad overview of what NEWA is. I'm going to actually get out of my presentation for a second and go to the live website so that I can just kind of walk you through this for a few minutes. So this is the landing page. This is newa.cornell.edu. I think I'm going to increase this just a little bit so that you can all see. And what I want to point out is that there are two basic ways to get around in NEWA. The first is this navigation bar that you're going to see at the top of every page on the website. So because we're talking with grape folks today, if you go to pest forecasts, you can click grape forecast models, and take it from there. And again, Tim is going to go over those resources in detail. I just wanted to point that out. The other way to get around is by going to this map, and you'll see this recurring throughout the website in different forms. But if you're on the home page and you're just browsing, what you can do is go to any one of these locations. I'll just go to the Finger Lakes because this is our big grape producing area where I am. You can click on any one of these little icons. It's supposed to be a water droplet and a green leaf, so you kind of get this yin-yang effect. But if you click on that, what it will do is it will take you to a weather, we call that a weather station page for that specific location. And you have a number of different pieces of information here. This group of tools here is just a different way to access these tools right here. Other items on this page include where is this location, you can zoom in and out. And then this also shows us what sensors are active at this location, and then the last download date. So it's a centralized location you can start from. If you've browsed through the NEWA website and you have a preferred station, what a lot of people will do right now is just bookmark this page up here in your browser, and then you don't have to go through that whole other process. So I just wanted to point that out in terms of getting around. Let me open up my presentation again, and we'll get right back to it. And so like I said, this is the main way you can get into those models from the weather station page. The one other thing I'll add is that once you access the grape models from a specific location, if you click on one of these links that I was just showing you, it automatically uses the weather data, in this case from Voorheesville, which I was looking at. And so that's a very useful aspect of this as well. Over here on the left-hand side, we have different types of tabular summaries. We have daily weather summaries, hourly summaries, and then we have some basic growing degree day tables. These are all based on what I was saying earlier with basic weather data. So if we were to click on one of these, what we would get is this sort of output. This is an hourly data summary, and our colleagues at NRCC just updated these tables so that if you copy and paste it, it fits into an Excel spreadsheet quite nicely. But what you can see is that we have different fields here. We have date and time, and this is hourly data. Things like air temperature, precip, relative humidity are all summarized. Depending on which of these you're looking at, they're going to be summarized in different ways. So, for example, precipitation is going to be a sum of all of the individual measurements taken within this hour. And an interesting side note that if you have a RainWise weather station, it actually sends data at 1 minute intervals to the RainWise servers. So what we do is we pull that 1 minute data and we summarize it into these hourly or if necessary, daily summaries. So things like precipitation, like I was saying, will be summed. Other things like wind direction is going to be averaged. Solar radiation would be summed. And again, daily summaries, similar output, it's just at a different time scale. We talk about degree day summaries. If you go back to that navigation bar, the very first drop down, you'll see that we have degree day summaries and a degree day calculator. The degree day summaries here are arranged in such a way that when you pick your preferred degree day type, so this is the base temperature, and in this example, we're looking at a base 50 Fahrenheit model, and you select the month of interest and click Get Report, this is what will happen. Here you have the date of the month, you have max and min temp reported, and then you have daily degree days, and this is actually in base 32. So over here you would just click this drop down and you would select base 32. But what I really want to point out here is that you've got 4 columns under accumulation. And so the January 1 column would be the number of base 32 degree days that have accumulated since January 1st. Under March 1st, it's the same idea. This is the number of degree days that have accumulated from March 1st, and so that's why those two things are different. So that's just a quick overview of degree day summaries. And the last weather-related tool I'll talk about in my time is the degree day calculator. And we have Google Analytics installed on the website, and this is actually one of our most popular tools because we have a certain set of models and resources available to help growers with risk assessments. But in cases where we don't have a specific tool, so say maybe you're trying to track crop growth and the base temperature, you can do your own calculations here. So you would select the degree day type, you would pick your start date, and you would pick your end date. These can be any dates within the range of data that has been reporting from a location. So for example, if a station in Geneva, New York started reporting in 2006 and we have data through 2012, in essence, you could get accumulation for that over the entire period of time. But on a more realistic scale, within a growing season, say you want to start something like March 15th, 2018 and end it today, you can get that specific output. And what this would look like is you have the past 2 days right here, you have your current date, and then you have, if you're looking at the current date, this would say 5-day forecast instead of ensuing 5 days. This happens when you're going back in time, and ensuing 5 days just indicates that you're looking at actual reported data in the past and not forecast values. So we have daily degree a day accumulation, seasonal accumulation, and then we just have this nice accumulation graph as a visual. So in the last few slides here, I just want to talk about where NEWA is going right now. And then for my portion, if we just want to have a discussion, that's fine. But so in terms of what NEWA is right now, the website itself is 10 or 11 years old, and it works really well. It's a workhorse. But when you look at it, you ask yourself, okay, well, could it be arranged a little bit differently? Things like that. And so over the past few months, actually the past year or so, what we've been doing is we've been going out and talking directly to growers. For example, this past fall semester, I worked with a bunch of graduate students in the School of Information Science at Cornell, which is interesting. It's outside the agricultural school, but we're really being encouraged to make these new connections. So what we did was with these graduate students went out and we interviewed apple and grape growers in the Finger Lakes saying, what do you think of NEWA? What do you like about it? What don't you like? And these were very interactive. So maybe someone would say, oh yeah, NEWA is great. I use this tool all the time. I wouldn't change anything about it. What the graduate students were able to do, and it was really interesting to kind of just step back and watch, is have that grower actually walk through it and just show them what they do. And more, about 50% of the time, we'll be like, oh, I thought it worked in such and such a way. And it actually, you could tell by their body language or, they're sighing, or, oh, I should be able to do this. We were able to pinpoint a lot of the things that could be improved with a website rebuild. And so between that and other things like a 5-month online survey that we just finished up at the end of January, where we reached out to current NEWA users and potential users, as well as a series of grower workshops that we've done, we're getting a really good sense of what, in terms of functionality, what the new website would need to do. So flexibility, we need to be able to access this not only on a browser within the desktop environment, but also on the smartphone. So how is that website page going to change when you're dealing with about 1/8 of the visual screen space? We also need customization. We have to be able to save our Biofix data. We need to be able to pick a station we want. What models do we want? If I'm a grape grower, I'm not necessarily interested in, by default, seeing all the available vegetable tools, and so on and so forth. And then the final big thing that really came out of it was that we need more user support. And that email address you saw a few minutes ago, support@newa.zendesk.com, is something we just launched a couple weeks ago, and I can already tell it's been very successful. So that help desk is gonna serve as a centralized point of support for weather station owners. If you've got an issue with the website or have a question about a model, that's where you can go now, and we can quickly hand that off if we don't have a direct answer to the person who developed the model or the weather station vendor, and so on and so forth. And so in just the last 2 minutes, I will show you what came out of that graduate student project, and then maybe we can have a little bit of discussion. So what you see here, and I'll make a disclaimer, this is probably not what NEWA is going to look like, but think about it from a conceptual standpoint. There's lots of things on this mock-up page, this is not a live website, that aren't necessarily incorporated into something like this. And so just to point it out quickly, this is the user preference, user profile system. And so, this guy, John, has set up a weather station, a profile that contains Baldwinsville, New York as the preferred station. And then you can drill down. So instead of getting full model results for every model he's interested in, you get a quick summary. And if you're interested, then you dive deep and you can customize everything basically. And so I just wanted to point that out because in the next year or so, we do have a USDA grant to get the responsive website that fits the different devices implemented, and hopefully some of these really high priority things that I've just described to you. So that's pretty much it for my presentation, but I'd be happy to answer questions or we can have a discussion about anything I've talked about so far.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, that was great. That mock-up looks awesome. I can't wait till it's live. So if anybody wants to ask some questions now before we switch over to Tim's presentation, you can go ahead and submit those in the Q&A box, which you can find on the bottom menu of your screen. All right, we got one right away. So what happened to the weather station at the teaching vineyard at Anthony Road? Todd wants to know.
That's in for servicing right now, and it's actually a top priority. So when I talk about this NEWA help desk system, one of the things I've noticed is that because NEWA has grown so quickly, even 3 or 4 years ago, NEWA was it was smaller, and so if there was a weather station issue, we also happen to have technicians in Geneva, and so it was a simple matter of, oh, so-and-so can just call Rainwise and fix the problem. So I'm mentioning the help desk because I'm actually able to answer that question right away. And I think in the past, it might have taken a few back and forth emails in a couple of days. But what's happening with the Anthony Road Winery is that Hans is talking with Rainwise right now about whether it should be repaired or simply replaced. And I don't want to speak for Hans, so I won't go further than that, except to say that we're very much on top of this, and Hans is very much on top of it. So I don't know if that's enough of an answer, but I'd be happy to, after the seminar's over, shoot an email to Hans and get him in touch directly with you.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. So Bill wants to know, can you overlay, say, 3 years of degree day info?
That is a great question. I wish we could right now. We can't. That has come up in all of these discussions. And so the way things have worked is, with all the people we've talked to, with all the surveys we've done, the top priorities going forward in the near to very midterm future is to get saved settings put in place. Once that's done, I have to look at the resources we have, but ideas like that are very much welcome. I come from a background of spatial analysis and historical overlays and things like that, and that's the sort of thing. Again, if you have ideas or questions, you can shoot a message to that support@newa.zendesk.com account, and we can talk more about it.
Hey Dan, this is Tim. You mentioned that they can take the degree day information from each year and pull it into Excel, and then you can use that data file to overlay the 3 years. It just is an added step they need to do.
That's a very good point. You are correct. So That is a workaround. There is no direct way, but if you go to each of the years that you're interested in, like Tim said, you can pull that easily into Excel now with our updated table summaries.
Great, yeah, and Alex just asked if it can be downloaded to Excel, and obviously the answer to that is yes, right?
Yeah, you have to copy and paste right now. With the new website, that's pretty much across the board a requested feature, is to be able to just have a button to download the data. In the meantime, just copy and paste, and that's what you should do.
Okay, and Anonymous asked, do the weather stations require AC power supply and network access? Do they allow the ability to collect data to be downloaded and uploaded to the server at a later time?
Another great question. So the way the weather stations work, they are battery powered, and each one has a solar panel. And so they charge themselves. The battery has to be replaced every few years. There are ways within the rainwise.net environment, which again is not linked with NEWA, but you would link with them before coming on board with us. You can look at that information and monitor the battery status and things like that. And so the way data is shared to the rainwise server is through a radio transmitter system. If you have on-farm internet access like DSL or high-speed internet, that data is shared almost instantly. So it's uploaded, I'm pretty sure it's a 1-minute interval, and it doesn't take a lot of bandwidth. If you don't have internet access on your farm, they do have an option called Telemet, which offers a cellular modem. So it is more expensive to get that extra equipment, and I think there's a fee for the cellular data plan. But if you have a vineyard that's in a remote area, but it's a very important vineyard, maybe a high value variety or crop, that is an alternate option, and we can just as easily link that cellular modem data once it's linked to Rainwise.
Excellent. I think that's all of our questions for the first half.
Can I jump in here? This is Tim Martinson.
Sure.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Dan. So when a weather station is offline, like the one that Todd Ickes mentioned, do you have a way of backfilling the data in so that it doesn't affect things like degree days and so forth?
Yeah, so there's two different ways we address that question. If it's a short-term outage, we pair a new weather station with an existing station. So this might be another Rainwise station in the area, or it might be one of the National Weather Service locations. And we do this to maintain a reasonable level of accuracy. So granted, it's not like on site, but if you're just out for an hour or two, you don't want the information in your grape disease models to be skewed by missing data. So that's one way we approach that situation. If a station is out for more than 3 weeks, we deactivate it. And that's what happened with the Finger Lakes station. Just because we don't want people using information that has so much substituted data that it becomes just unreliable, because we're talking about high value sprays and management decisions. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Dan.
Okay.
Great. So if that's all for now, we'll move on to Tim.
All right, thank you. We're gonna see how this works. I keep getting messages that my internet connection is unstable, so if I pop in and out, I'll try not to, but all right. Can everybody, let's see, it's supposed to be coming up. Can everybody see the screen now?
Yep, we can see it.
Excellent. Okay, so as Dan mentioned, I do the grape IPM portion of the NEWA. And, if you ever have any questions about NEWA, feel free to send me an email. I really enjoy talking about NEWA. It's one of my pet projects. So we will let's see. All right, so grape and disease and insect models on NEWA. So really we cover the majority of the primary pests of grapes in NEWA. And these models have been developed by the disease models have been developed. Wayne Wilcox, Dave Goddori, Bob Seam have all worked on this. We still use the Bucharest model for some of the diseases. You can see downy mildew, that's the one that Dave and Bob Seam worked on a lot. We have grape berry moth. That was actually a multi-state effort. Penn State, Michigan State, and Cornell faculty and extension staff got together and we did a project for, I think, 4 or 5 years to tweak the model and make it better. So that's on there. Dan mentioned a couple different ways to get to the disease and insect models. One of the ways that he didn't mention, it's not my favorite way, but again, with NEWA, what you're gonna find out, the best way to figure out how to use NEWA is to go in and use NEWA. You will find the best way for you. I like using the station page and go in that way because it's just, for me, the quickest way to get to it. But you can also go up in that little blue menu bar that Dan talked about that's on every page. If you go to crop pages and then select grapes, you can see that the grape disease model, there's powdery, phomopsis, black rot. You can even get your accumulated growing degree days through there. There's the grape downy mildew model for DM cast, and then grape berry moth as well, along with a host of other information. So if you go in and you select that way, you select your grape forecast models, you're going to come in here and it's going to ask you what you want to select. In this drop-down menu, you have the grape diseases, DM cast, and grape berry moth are your choices. If you select grape diseases, you can pick the state, pick the weather station if you know it, and then what your ending date is. And the nice thing about this menu here is that, as Dan mentioned, there's data there from the day that station was set up that's archived. So if it's this time of year and you said, you know, I had a problem with downy mildew last year and I'm planning my schedule for this coming year, let's go back, and you can actually go back and select, you know, October 1st of 2017 and get all the infection periods from last year. So you can see, compare that with your spray records, and you can see if maybe you just got overwhelmed, if the sprays didn't quite hit at the right times because it was so wet you couldn't get them on in a timely manner. So there's, not only is this a tool to help you plan your IPM strategy for this year, but it also gives you that ability to go back and help to troubleshoot problems that you may have had. So here's the station page. You have the grape diseases. As I said, I like going in this way because the station page is great. You can go in and you can see when it was last downloaded. So Tim Martinson mentioned, you know, what's there if you're missing data. And so if you are missing that 3 hours, you're going to get data from a sister station. Well, this will let you know the last downloaded, will let you know if the information that you're looking at is current for that station, or maybe it's having a problem and it hasn't been downloaded for 4 or 5 hours. So you're actually pulling in some information from a sister station. So that, you know, just that added piece of information to help you determine how reliable that information is. A lot of folks, you know, the best thing to do is get a weather station for your farm. As Dorothy said in The Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home. If you have that weather station there, you know that information is correct for your site. Most people are going to be pulling information from a number of different sites and then trying to extrapolate the data for their vineyard operation that may be located, you know, between 2 or 3 other stations. So that's helpful. The station sensors, it's going to temperature, leaf wetness, precip, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, and solar radiation. For the disease models, we're really concerned primarily with temperature, leaf wetness, precipitation, and then if you get into the downy mildew, you're going to want some relative humidity there as well. So this leaf wetness sensor is important, even though NEWA has developed, working with the Climate Center, have developed an algorithm to be able to calculate leaf wetness, even if a leaf wetness sensor isn't there. So like if you have an airport, typically they don't have leaf wetness sensors with their weather equipment. So it'll be a calculated leaf wetness. Again, and it's just something to keep in mind as you're moving forward. Station location, that's important as well, especially if you're looking at, because we do pull information in from airports in the area. So you can see, is the station located near a vineyard? Is it located near an orchard? Is it actually located near a parking lot of a large processor? Is it next to the runway at an airport? Those types of things are going to impact your temperature and wind speed, things like that. So if we click on the grape forecast models, what you're going to see is it's going to come up and it's going to tell you yes or no. Was there an infection period? And the nice thing is it's going to give you what the past 2 days were. So if you didn't quite get to it on a daily basis, you can see right away if you had infection periods that you missed and need to do something about. But it also uses the National Weather Service forecast to forecast 5 days into the future as to what's going to happen. And so not only I guess we're not reactive anymore by adding that 5-day forecast from the National Weather Service, we can be a bit proactive in saying, okay, it looks like, June 4th through the 5th, looks like we're going to have some infection periods. We need to get out there and get something done if we're getting to the end of our spray interval. Right down here, phenological stage, this is a nice little thing that they've put in there. You can actually go in for your crop and different varieties in that, and you can put in what the phenological stage is at that time. And what that's going to help you do is, excuse me, let me go back here. So you can see we have phomopsis, powdery mildew, and black rot. We're at 10 inches of shoot growth. We're at June 1st. If we move forward to July 20th, and you can see it says we're at bunch closure, powdery mildew went away. So what NEWA model does is it's calculating infection potential for primary inoculum of powdery mildew, which starts to drop off right away around the bloom or the bloom period. And so Wayne Wilcox, when we were discussing this, decided that once bloom occurs, we're not going to show powdery mildew infection periods anymore, because those primary infections of powdery mildew, all it needs is high relative humidity to pump out secondary inoculum and get secondary infections. So once we've come to this point, you figure that pretty much every day is going to be a secondary infection period for powdery mildew. So I mentioned this bunch closure, being able to pick the phenological stage. And what that helps you do is that Wayne Wilcox worked with Juliet Carroll, who's the fruit IPM coordinator, and myself, and did a really good job of going through all the different growth stages and the diseases of that growth stage, and came up with some disease management, not necessarily recommendations, but some guidelines, things that you should be thinking about at that particular stage. Is primary inoculum present? Has it gone away? If it's wet, this is what you should do. So if you haven't used this, this is an excellent tool. Just, you probably know this information, but it's just a really good reminder of some of the things you should be thinking about. Events log. I really like these. These are really nice. The Grape of Events Log, and this is right below the disease management section. You just keep scrolling down that page, and you can see, July 16th, and it gives you the running history through the growing season up to that point. So Phomopsis, black rot infection periods. We're working right now trying to figure out how to get powdery mildew primary infection periods in there, because that's a daily event, the way it's recorded now, rather than an event during leaf wetness periods. But this is really handy. You can go in and say, you know, from the 15th through the 22nd, there was a lot of rainfall and infection periods going on for Phomopsis and black rot. With powdery mildew, 10th inch of rain and a minimum temperature of 50°F is all that's needed for a primary infection period for powdery mildew. So you can, I mean, pretty easily go over here and see whether or not you had a primary infection period. And combined event, this is a question folks usually ask. With a combined event, that means the leaf wetness period, maybe broke in half. And the first half wasn't enough to be called an infection period. There may have been 1 or 2 hours of drying during that time, but then you started up with another leaf wetness period. So the average temperature over those 2 events was enough to make it an infection period. So that's where this combined event comes into play. And then the leaf wetness log, same type of deal. It just gives you every time the leaves were wet, it will tell you. And you can see that there's a lot of times where we recorded leaf wetness and did not have infection periods. But that just kind of, I look at this, if I'm going back, especially if I've had a problem with a particular disease, I'll go back and look at that and say, okay, you know, was it a really wet season? Was the canopy unusually wet during the year? So just another tool that you can use. This one's more for troubleshooting than it is to help you implement during the season. Grapevine downy mildew, as I said, this is kept separate from the black rot, powdery, and Phomopsis models because it requires a lot more input from the user, which is good. It gives you the ability to fine-tune this model for your particular operation. So you can see up here, choosing downy mildew, final date, you choose your cultivar for Concord. If you were to hit this through your station page, you would still get this, whereas with the grape disease models, if you hit it, it just automatically goes to what you want. But because you can choose your cultivar, you're going to get this section here. And the thing about NEWA, and it's one of the things that, you know, during the discussions with Dan and the different people is we'd like to see is once you choose, you're able to set up that profile. So I don't have to come in and choose Concord every time. But you hit calculate, and this is going to tell you the Eichhorn-Lorenz stage, number 12 for Concord. All right, what that is that's 5 or 6 flat leaves. And if the cluster is showing, and the old model for grape downy mildew was 10, 10, 10, so 10 centimeters of shoot growth, 10 millimeters of rain, and 10 degrees Celsius. So this is, it has to reach about your 10-inch shoot growth before the variety starts to become susceptible for downy mildew. So it tells you when that 10-inch shoot growth or that area was reached. So on May 20th, it tells you that a primary infection occurred on May 21st. And so we go lower on that page, and you can see that it told us a primary infection event occurred on May 21st, but we go down and we don't see that here because usually this nice little green with the blue underbar tells you that it was an infection event. So we go to the 21st, we'll go down to the downy mildew warning history and look and see the 21st and that, and really was an incomplete primary infection at that time. And so the first primary infection that we had was on the 25th. So switching gears, going away from the diseases and going into the Great Berry Moth. As I said, Great Berry Moth was a 3-university study looking at it. Used to be that we'd do the Great Berry Moth risk assessment, pretty straightforward. You'd classify your vineyards as to risks to Great Berry Moth damage. It was either high risk or low risk. If you weren't sure, you had the catch-all category of intermediate risk. High risk, you automatically put on 2 sprays. Intermediate risk, you'd put on 1 spray. And then you'd scout. With the low risk, you'd scout 2 times before you'd spray. But we started looking at that. That started to fail after a while, which is why we looked at, okay, we need to learn more about the pest itself. Mike Saunders down at Penn State in his lab, Tobin, did some work, and they found out that it takes about 810 degree days to go from egg to the female laying another egg. So 1 complete generation. So 810 degree days, and that's at 47.17 degrees Fahrenheit. Obviously, they did the work in Celsius. So when they did the calculations, you get that little funky thing, which is a nice thing about NEWA, is that it does the calculations for you. You don't have to worry about things like that. So we have the Great Berry Moth model. You click on Great Berry Moth, you have the date, and you can see that it's going to tell you what your growing degree days have been. Similar to the disease models, it gives you the current degree day accumulation, the past 2 days, and also uses the National Weather Service forecast to forecast out those 5 days. So when do we start collecting the degree days? And that's where it's really important. Wild grape bloom. You need to go out, and that's the real driver of this model, which makes it really effective, is being able to go out and say, okay, my Biofix date, or the day that I'm going to start collecting degree days, is wild grape bloom. So that's about 50% bloom. Go out, you find your wild grapes in the woods alongside the vineyard, and keep your eye on those, collect that. You can put it in. NEWA is going to automatically fill that in for you. We have years and years and years of history, and it'll tell you it's calculated for you, but it's using information from Concord Block in Fredonia, New York, which is out in the Lake Erie region, because we had so many years of data, both phenological data and growing degree day information that we could use. So it'll calculate that out for you. But again, you know, if you know the date, put that date in there. So you have your degree day, what's happened, what's forecast. It'll tell you the pest status. So you can see we just got done with bloom, or the wild grape bloom. And so we're only at 51 degree days. It'll talk about the first generation. Really, first generation of Great Berry Moth, research has shown that there's no reason to spray for that unless you're in an extremely high risk site. And then that would be worth putting an insecticide in with your first fungicide application after bloom. So we get closer to 810, and as we start getting closer to 810, we should be checking this on a daily basis. And you can see we're collecting about between 31 and 33 degree days each day. And so we're at 782. Pest status, females are active, and egg laying is at its peak. Talking about 810 degree days is important. So in high risk vineyards, it also talks about the type of material that you're using. You know, does it need to be ingested like a Alachlor or an Intrepid? Then you want to get that as close to 810 as possible. It talks about you should be scouting in the low and intermediate risk vineyards. Again, with the high risk vineyards, we figure you automatically need to put an insecticide on. Low and intermediate, go out and scout. Decide if you need to do that. Do that scouting between the 750 and 800 degree days, and look for 6% damage clusters. So if you look at 50 clusters on the edge, 50 clusters on the interior, if you have 6% damage clusters, then you're going to have 6%, and you need to do something about it. So moving on, you know, we just a couple days here, and we're at 813. So egg laying continues. We've missed the first part of the generation. So egg laying is continued. Now we're moving from materials that need to be ingested to materials that are contact. And so that'll let you know that. We move ahead again. And again, up here, your wild grape bloom, it isn't something that you can just put in once and then go back to it the next day. You need to make sure that you are filling this in each time you run the model. And if you run the model for different vineyards, let's say you have vineyards that are miles apart, we've found that the wild grape bloom can be drastically different between those two areas. And so you need to keep track, and you'll be able, or need to change your wild grape bloom date each time you run the model for the different areas. So you can see 1620 is the next. So we have 810. If you add 810 to that, you're at 1620. So we're moving up there. Second generation larvae are protected within berries, so there's no reason to spray. But you should be, you know, you're in that 1470 to 1620 degree day for scouting. So you should be out there looking for that. At this point in time, you're at 15% damage clusters. And so you should be looking at spraying. Again, as you get close to 1620, you want to use the materials that can be ingested or need to be ingested. Once you pass 1620, then you need to switch back over to your contacts. And you can see we're at 1824, so the third one would actually be, 2430 would be the next generation if we have it. If you're further south, if Long Island sometimes can reach that. And this says, with the exception of extremely warm years, no further action is required. You know, kind of, I would take that with a grain of salt, or here's where you need to use a little bit of history in your own vineyard, because I know that there have been times where we have seen damage later in the season. One of the reasons for that is you have multiple generations that we're treating for. The first generation, we tend to see a pretty nice peak. If we put out pheromone traps, we'll see where they come out, and it's fairly tight. As you get to the second generation, it starts to spread out a little bit. And by the third generation, it's really spread out, which is why in some of the really high-risk vineyards, we look at bracketing our sprays. So we're looking at going in prior to the 810 and then going in again a week to 10 days later to try and catch the stragglers in that. I mentioned how important the wild grape bloom date is the Biofix. This is just an example. In 2013, we had some problems with grape berry moth late season damage. And so working with the growers, we looked at it, and we had May 22nd and May 26th were some confirmed wild grape bloom dates in the area. The grower was using the Biofix date that was calculated by NEWA, which was June 8th. And you can see at the 810 degree days, so when we're going after that second generation, it's not too bad. The May 22nd, May 26th is pretty close. June 8th, you're already a week off. And then if you go to 1620, so you're into August, you know, you're anywhere between 2 and 4 days off between even the May 22nd and the May 26th. So you're maintaining that 4-day deal. But you can see June 8th, you're still a week or a week and a day off the May 26th. And then as we go later in the season, you can see that even though the May 22nd and May 26th stayed fairly close the first week in October, we would have missed that entirely with the June 8th because it just didn't show up. We weren't able to calculate enough growing degree days to do the job. So just stressing that you really need to get the wild grape bloom date and use that as the Biofix each time. And I looked at my watch and we're running toward the end of this. So I will stop and answer any questions.
Thanks, Tim. So yeah, we've got a few already. I think you just covered this, but Jim says, I can't find wild grapevines in my area. I need a different Biofix indicator. What to do?
Yeah, that's no wild grape, huh? Boy, are you lucky.
Maybe you can plant one, Jim.
No, actually, you know, you mentioned that, but not knowing where you are, we are working with Jody Timer, who's the entomologist down at the Penn State Lab, and we're propagating the wild grape that they used to make the degree day model. So you can get in touch with me later on, and I may be able to get you a cutting of that so you can have your very own wild grape to use, because we're going to be running those around to all the different stations, at least in the Lake Erie region, and planting one close to the machine so the grower can go out and actually have a wild grape that he knows is accurate for the Biofix.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. So I hope that answers it. Jim, let us know if you have any questions about contacting Tim. So there's a few questions on the possibility of additional pests being added to the site. So Gary wants to know, is foliar phylloxera or spotted wing Drosophila there? Are there plans for any more?
Not at this time. If there's suggestions of what you'd like to see, we're seeing a reemergence of grape rootworm in the Lake Erie and Finger Lakes region. And so we're actually using NEWA with growing degree days, air temp. Dan has suggested that maybe we get some more sensors and try and do soil temp as well to try and come up with a degree day model for that. But if you have suggestions of what you'd like to see, I'm more than happy to talk to the researchers who could help us come up with those models.
Great. And David wants to know, are there options to get automatic email alerts from the system, for example, 810 growing degree day threshold at station XYZ, or do you have to monitor it yourself on a regular basis?
Actually, in New York State, we've been beta testing something that we call NEWA, and it's a daily email that you pick what stations you want, station or stations, and you pick when you want to have it delivered. And it's like I said, a daily email that gives you the grape diseases. It doesn't do downy mildew because there's so much that the user has to input into that system, but it'll give you the powdery Phomopsis black rot and grape berry moth. And so it'll tell you what those model readings are. And so you get that. I always say that with that, though, it just is a kind of heads up that if you're getting close, maybe you want to go into the website just to make sure. So, send me an email if you're interested, because we're going to be doing that again this year. So.
Awesome.
Tim, I'll also add, if any of you want to make that request through the support email address that was provided, or contact Tim directly, whatever's easiest.
Oh, that's fine. You can send everything to Dan, and then he can send it.
Yeah, no, that's what it's there for. We're really trying to streamline stuff. So if that's helpful, certainly lean on the support at newa.zendesk.com, and I'll help to compile those requests.
And one of the reasons I say that, Dan, is because I know that if you get it, you're going to keep it in a database, and if it comes to me, I have an email, and not necessarily keeping it all in a nice database. I just respond to it and move on. So.
Yep.
Tim Martinson here. I just wanted to make a comment here. I've posted a couple links to some of the articles basically about grape berry moth. And one in particular is one where all the people involved in the grape berry moth model sort of describe what went into making that model. And I think that's a sort of a barrier to getting other things like spotted winged Drosophila and foliar phylloxera is that we don't have the same sort of science behind it that we can use to make to put these models online.
Yep, excellent point, Tim. That's why I mentioned going to the researchers but I think even like with grape berry moth, it's industry that says this needs to be done. And so put your voice out there and say, hey, this needs to be done. And then it's trying to find the resource. Well, if the researcher's interested, then it's trying to find the resources to be able to do it.
Great. I actually have a question, just one quick one before we end here. I just want to clarify, when you're using the grape forecast model for diseases, for example, I just pulled up today's date in Geneva, and it's telling me to look out for Phomopsis coming up on April 12th. But obviously there's no risk of powdery and no risk of black rot, which it says. But right before that in Phomopsis, it says combined. What does that mean?
The combined?
Yes.
Yeah. That is a little bug that if you have, because I noticed that when I was going through it also, that it's preseason and they're telling you to watch out for Phomopsis. But the combined means that there was an infection or a leaf wetness period that didn't quite make it to the point where it was a true infection period for that disease. You may have had an hour or two of drying time, and then you had another infection period following that.
Okay.
And so the thought is that 1 to 2 hours of drying time wasn't enough to separate the infection or the leaf wetness periods. And so it's the combined infection period or combined leaf wetness periods to make an infection period.
I see. Okay. Got it. That makes sense.